But if we can get the camera on this young, svelte gentleman to my left, your right, one of my oldest football friends, Sheldon Nasty Napastuk, the hot dog man.
How you doing, Rod?
Good, Nasty. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been too long.
It has been.
It's been a few years now. I used to get on your show every now and then. A few years
That's
back
right.
to cover some Rider Stampeder rivalry stuff. But good to see you again, my friend.
It's always good to see you. It always has been. And look, we're going to have a lot of fun here over the next 20 minutes with Shell, and then we're going to let him go because he's running on fumes. He's managing running a startup. But you got to hear his story. He's from North Battleford, Saskatchewan. Dare I say the second most famous football player from North Battleford, Saskatchewan. You know that. Went on to play at Iowa State. 6'4", 270, with an afro, 6'6". And he played in the CFL from 1999 to 2006. And I'm looking at the years, and it was only 2 years with Saskatchewan. Then he came to the dastardly Calgary Stampeders, right in the middle of that heated rivalry. It was in 2003. And you stayed. You played and stayed, Shell. What was it? You met a girl, right?
Well, I met a girl in Regina. Actually, I was with the Riders for 4 seasons. So the first year I was there was Cal Murphy, and that was sort of the hot dog story. I just kind of walked.
Which we'll get to.
Yeah. And went out to Calgary, and it was kind of funny because, as you know, anybody that's been a Riders fan going to a Calgary game, it used to feel like a home game. We'd walk in there. I'd see guys from my high school in Calgary cheering for the Riders. Yeah, let's go into Napastuk. And then as soon as you change jerseys, the same guys, the same season tickets are
yelling at you.
Oh, yeah, traitor, yeah. I'm like, well, what are you doing here? You on vacation? They're like, no, I work here. Well,
what's the difference?
I work here too, right? Like, come on, man.
Oh, trust me. I know the feeling. I'm going through it. I guess we should back up and go through this chronologically because I think if you Google the story, I don't want to say you're old, but I don't know if there was internet when the story came out in 1999.
Yeah.
How your pro football career began. It is one of the greatest stories I've ever heard, and you know that. Tell the viewers how this happened.
Well, it was funny. So I played my ball down in Iowa State in the Big 8, the Big 12, and we're used to playing 70,000 to 90,000 people. And I came up and was kicking around trying to get onto a roster, but as a defensive tackle, if you're not playing on special teams, it's kind of hard to crack a roster, right? Because you just didn't have enough roster space. Kicked around a couple years, didn't catch on with a team. And then 1 year in Saskatoon, I'm running a hot dog cart business. And at nights, we would have them out front of nightclubs. And the Riders would have training camps in the summertime there in Saskatoon. So one night, I've got the hot dog carts up, and a bunch of big guys come walking in. And everybody's, yo, man, get me a dog, man. And I'm like, holy cow, it's the Riders. And, I walked away from there, and it's bothering me. And it bothered me so much, I called my mom. And Mom, like 2 years ago, I'm playing in front of
And she was in North Battleford?
She was in North Battleford on the farm. And she said, well, if you want to play, just tell me you want to play. I'm like, oh, Mom, you don't get it. This is pro sports. You just don't say, can I play too? And she goes, well, if I don't know anything about sports, if you're not going to do it, don't complain to me.
What a mom. I love her already.
Yeah, and, and I thought about it, and I thought, wow, why not? So I picked up the phone. I called Cal Murphy at the time, and, of course, no answer, no call back. Called him again a few days later, no call back, no answer. I get it, they're in training camp. But week 2 of the season, I heard that Scrivener and Van Wise heard a knee.
Nelly.
Scrivener, yeah, and it was a little bit banged up, and I'm like, you know what? Now or never. So I shut down the carts. I drove 2.5 hours down to Regina. I waited 4 or 5 hours for them to finish practices and meetings, and I actually caught Cal Murphy walking out of the stadium afterwards. I just walked up to him, and he said, "Hey, you know what? I'm sorry, but we're good. I got your call. I should have called you back. I didn't." So I said, "Here's my college game films." I said, "You know what? If you guys need anything, I'm just up the road." So he goes, "Okay, no problem." So drive back up to Saskatoon. That night, I walk into my house. The phone rings. It's Cal. Well, you know what? We were hoping maybe we'd get you down tomorrow, just get you on film, see how you're moving and all that stuff. Like, no promises and no problem. So again, next morning, shut down the cars, went down to Regina, worked out for 15 minutes, had an interview with the coaches, and they said, well, we got you on film, we'll let you know. And drove back to Saskatoon. As soon as I walked into my house, the phone rang. Sheldon, you're a rider. You're moving to Regina. And it was unbelievable. It lasted only 6 or 7 games and a couple on practice roster, but it was my foot into the door. But the whole point is, they weren't going to call me, right? It was, and I wasn't even going to do it myself. It was from my mom saying, "Come on, man, if you're if you're
Don't
not gonna
complain
do it,
to me."
don't complain.
Yeah.
Either do something about it or move on." And the next season I was starting, and it just went on from there.
A great career. And on the flip side of that, I do want to mention the radio show, the Chevy and Nasty show with my good friend Randy Chevrier, which quite frankly, he was over here in Calgary. We hated each other with the Stamps and the Riders, but here was Chevy writing me going, Rod, I get you. I know what you're doing. Right? And then we ended up together in 2016 with the Riders. Not for long, but long enough.
Yeah.
Right? So you guys, Randy Chevrier, Google him, former Dallas Cowboy, Montreal guy. You guys have a special friendship too.
Well, and it goes back. So when obviously in pro sports, when they brought Randy in, it was with the thoughts of replacing me. And
I didn't know that.
Well, yeah, he's a backup defensive tackle and is a good friend of Tom Higgins. At the time, he's a defensive tackle. He even played tackle in the NFL. But I mean, anybody who's ever met Chevy, you just love the guy, right? And we hit it off instantly. And we worked really closely together for 3-4 seasons there with the Stamps. Ended up getting started on a radio show where we had the Chevy and Nasty show, which of course the Nasty nickname, nobody called me Nasty except for Rod Pedersen, right? That was you coined that phrase, you coined that name, and it kind of stuck on the radio. And I think we were on for 6 or 7 seasons.
It's a long time.
It was a long time. Yeah, we even came back last year for a special comeback show.
How'd that go?
Oh, it was fun. It was a hoot. I mean, it was any chance to get on the air with Chevy again was just a blast.
So, how many seasons here with the Stamps?
Well, it was 4 with the Riders and 4 with the Stampeders. So
it's not bad. That's a good career. Yeah. Like when the average pro career, they used to say it's 3. It's not. It's 1.5 now for pro football players.
I mean, that's just the thing. The toughest thing is to make it 2 to 3 seasons because you really have to earn your keep. And that is not like how big, strong, or fast. It's how disciplined you are, like how much you can be trusted on your assignments and how can you get the job done. And once you figure that out, you can basically play until your body gives up on you.
As a Canadian, can I say that as a Canadian, you can play a little longer than in this league?
Yeah, I think that's fair because it's hard to find. At that time, it was kind of hard to find Canadian talent that was ready to compete. I mean, then the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Canadian Air Force blew that out. I mean, we've the history of Canadian receivers being the best in the league. But once you're in, it's you play until your body stops or the general manager looks at your birth certificate and says it's time to go.
You're done. But I don't think you have any real regrets. You can't. I wouldn't think.
8 seasons in a 9-team league. You would think if I had one more season, it would have given me a Grey Cup. I think the only regret I have is a Grey Cup. But honestly, like the CFL, making a living playing football for that long, and still having a lot of close friends and connections in Regina and Calgary, it was awesome, Rod. I mean, a Saskatchewan farm kid playing for the Riders. Come on.
I know. Well, Craig Drebbett in Calgary is watching. He says, "Oh man, the Chevy and Nasty show was absolute gold. Loved listening to it in the office, kind of like the RP show now." How did you feel playing against the Riders? Because, listen, in that era, when you were here, our big rivalry was BC, and it was ridiculous. It became Calgary. But you were here when Hank came over.
That's right.
And you saw everything that he put up with.
Yeah, when I came with Hank, Maxie, and a bunch of the other, we started George White. A few guys were coming over, but you're right. It was that BC rivalry for you guys. But it was amazing. I think anytime you go back to your hometown team, like not just the team I started on, but the team that I grew up cheering for, it was always special playing against the Riders, and you always kind of want to stand out in those games, right? You want to stand out, do your job every game, but there's I don't care what they say. Some games are a little more special than others, and that rivalry really started brewing around that time, and I enjoyed it.
Well, I was sad when you left. What was the conditions of that? You got a better offer? What was the deal? We didn't trade you.
Oh no, it was rated free agency, and the Riders had a proposal out, and it was unacceptable, and I think it was like, I can't remember what the money was back then, but I told Roy Shivers what I thought, the deal should be based on Charbonneau and some of the other guys that were playing at that time, right? And he goes, that would make you one of the highest paid guys on the team. I'm like, not even close, right? It was the hometown discount. But at the end of the day, I never felt like I was totally accepted by that administration. And so when free agency hit, Riders in Montreal and BC were all on the phone that morning. But Calgary, it was Jim Daly got on the phone and he explained to me the difference between income taxes and property taxes. Like, they really came to me from an intellectual level. Come here, you'll get an oil field job in the off season. And I'm like, well, you know what? Calgary seems like a great place to be. And, for the next chapter of my life. So that was really a determining factor. And the money, but it was a better deal. But it was just a great opportunity at that time.
Our viewers pointing out it's 1111 Mountain. I'm not sure if you're into numerology or not, but there you go. The opportunity portal is open. Interesting that we talk about Calgary as a wonderful city for opportunities, and it is beautiful when that happens. Wayne watching in BC, a good Saskatchewan boy playing for the Riders. Nasty showed his perseverance to get the job in the first place. The interesting thing was what you saw here, because who would have ever thought that Nick Lewis and I would get to be good friends, and we are now, and we hated each other before. But he's told me some Federic stories and some Dunnigan stories.
Oh, man. Yeah, I've blocked a lot of those years out, but it was some interesting times. Like, Dunnigan was all energy and he just wasn't ready for the job at the time. But I personally I enjoyed Matt. I mean, he was an interesting guy to be around. Training camps, though, I mean, no respect for defensive linemen. We had that one training camp. We were on the turf because of the rain. We had like 4 defensive tackles in camp. All 3 of them were injured. So I was taking every single rep of starting lineup plus the scout team. And honestly, I think that's where the start of my back problems came from, was just practicing on turf, 2-a-days, being the only defensive tackle. It was unbelievable.
Well, I guess you guys don't get a lot of respect. And speaking of, by the way, Roy Shivers would end up paying Canadian defensive tackles a lot of money. Scott Schultz being one, right? Ended up being one of the highest paid guys on the team, because he realized, I'd be shocked why he didn't know how important that was. But
well, not just as a good player, but when you have a kid, and Scott, I mean, he's right out of Moose Jaw, right? He was an explosive defensive tackle. He had a great personality, and he's really engaged with the community for the years that he's there. I mean, that's if you're a CFL franchise, that's gold. You've got to take care of your local talent, especially if they can play. Right?
Yeah, and they did. However, I think of you all the time. I was just doing, I guess you could say, sprints on a treadmill in Florida at an Orange Theory, and I'm like, I'm not built to do this. And I think about you all the time. When you pulled a hip flexor.
You think about me?
Yes.
Wow.
Sheldon said this 20 years ago. You pulled a hip flexor doing gassers in training camp, and you said the same thing to me. Not in an interview or anything, but they're like, I can't run like a wide receiver.
Yeah.
Right, do you remember that?
Well, yeah, because different body types train differently. Like, the same thing with strength and conditioning. When I came to Calgary, sorry if I'm changing the topic.
No,
here,
it's good.
I started when my career really turned around. We got in the All-Star seasons and all that. Was when I started training with a guy named Ron Jarrett here in Calgary, and he trained differently. I mean, we put away the weights, we pulled out tires and ropes and hammers, and this was still back in 2005. It was just the start of the new training regimens. We trained for my position. To build that explosiveness. Before you go for those long runs, he made sure like everything was worked out, stretched out properly, because I'm not exactly a thoroughbred horse, right? I'm more of a Sherman tank, right?
Clydesdale.
And exactly. Yeah, a little more than a Clydesdale.
Right.
But
the old linemen are the Clydesdale.
Yeah, but and that's the thing. I think training has gotten so smart. And take a look at all pro leagues right now. The training is so specific.
Yep.
It's so smart in terms of how they develop a person's body, build up the core, work on your weak points. Back even in late 90s, early 2000s, it was still just bench press, squats, and cleans, right? And
it's just hard to believe, because what Danny Barrett's doing now. He's gone on to an unbelievable coaching career. He's with the Houston Texans as the running backs coach. He'd been with the Dolphins before that and the University of Buffalo.
Oh, good on him.
Right, but you would think a quarterback or his therapy staff would realize not to run everybody the same.
Rod, to be honest with you, and looking back, there's probably a certain component of I was a big guy and I just didn't like to run gassers in training camp. I mean,
ruin this for me.
There's that too, right? Maybe I could have done a little more winter conditioning to get ready for it. I don't know.
Fair enough. But hey, when you're on the shelf, you're on the shelf, right? And I remember that you were hurt not for long. But before we let you go, can you tell the viewers what you're into now? This is exciting.
Oh, well, yeah. So I was in commercial real estate. And then when COVID hit, I started seeing the need for increased marketing, getting inside of buildings, getting a look when people weren't touring and traveling as much. And my wife and I, while camping out in Kukanoosa, BC, came up with the idea to start We Drone, where we start like filming from drones. We've got 3D cameras for walkthroughs. We shoot real estate and corporate videos. So just back into the media this time. Instead of being on this end of the mic, I'm on the other side of the camera, and it's been awesome.
Good. Nice that you can do both.
Yeah,
You're a talented guy.
Thanks, Rod.
Well, Shell, we're around. Always had your number. Let's keep in touch, and hopefully we can do it again.
Rod, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Nasty Napastuk. Sheldon Napastuk, CFL alum. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching the RP Show on YouTube. And don't forget, we're live daily on YouTube from noon to 2 Eastern. If you like what you see, hit subscribe. And if you like the program, check around for other segments of The Rod Pedersen Show here on YouTube.